Okay, so I already started to write a blog called Somethoughtsivehad, but I decided to sort of take the ideas of the collage and montage to create a vlog using material I've already written to create this masterpiece. So let's hope it goes well. So I decided to read my blog over the top of, well, the first one I did was about finance and the economy. So, Pink Floyd, Money.
As a culture media theory MA student, and as an aspiring contemporary thinker, or just someone that is interested in current affairs, I try my best to keep up to date with current events by either reading or watching the news whenever I can. Recently, the news media seem to be fixated upon the miserable and hopeless situation that is the current financial crisis. The blame for the dreadful state of the economy, according to the news media, lies mainly with the bank's irresponsible behaviour in both lending and borrowing vast sums of money that could not be paid back, and even encouraging bankers to lend money to bank customers for commission.
Actually, the real reason the economy is screwed is because most bankers are bloody stupid. And here's some proof.
This financial crisis we find ourselves in would seem to have been on the cards for quite some time then, beginning with rising house prices several years ago and becoming quite evident last year when Northern Rock was nationalised by the government. Ever since the Northern Rock fiasco, the economy began to slow down and take a nosedive, trading slowed down and the share prices dropped and banks became more wary about borrowing and lending money to each other. Now, the reason I write about our current financial situation is because I believe that the current plan to rescue our economy will have effects on our ways of life, on capitalism, and on how society functions in general. The rescue plan devised by Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling is to buy into the banks using money from Britain's taxpayers, making the government, and thus the taxpayer, the majority shareholder in many of the banks in Britain. I read that the Treasury said that it would inject at least £50 billion to recapitalise the banks.
£50 billion? But where does this come from? Surely something misses out, like the NHS or schools or something else. Seems a bit rich.
Capitalism is the economic system Britain and many other democratic countries have adopted or had to utilise. It involves the elite or bourgeoisie controlling the means of production, trade and distribution through a free market, using the money of centralised banks as opposed to a communist or socialist system which are governed by the state or government. Taking my very brief and detail-lacking description of capitalism into account, it would seem that if the government were to pump billions of pounds of tax money into the banks, then the notion of Britain having a capitalist economy withers away somewhat. If the money used for trade, production and distribution is a collection of bourgeois money, state-controlled money and taxpayer money, then is this not a slight move away from capitalism to a more socialist structure? Is Marx's vision of class struggle and a move away from capitalism to communism on the cards?
Communism? What was I thinking?
The financial crisis thus raised some interesting questions for me about the cultural and sociological future of Britain, as well as questions of the future of the economy. However, after much thought, I would have to answer the two questions I raised above with probably not, and that fundamentally Marx's vision of communism and an egalitarian society is still on the back burner. The reason I say this is because the government do not intend to end free trade and have control over trade and distribution. Rather, Messrs Brown and Darling only intend to invest this money into the banks until they are sufficiently capable of supporting themselves, so that they may be privatised again before reinstating capitalism. A few interesting issues to point out would be that the government have used force to make the banks take the money on offer, and according to news sources, are making the banks take more money than they have asked for, so this economic crisis can be more easily evaded in the future. I have also read that the government intend to force banks to begin lending to both customers and each other more openly again, so as to generate movement and growth for the British economy. These factors arguably reveal some moves towards socialist methods of economic structure and control. It is interesting to think about how this would change British society if this became a move towards a socialist economy, and how a more balanced and shared control over the economy in Britain would affect the ways in which we consume, trade, distribute and produce. However, unless the economy stays this way, which appears to be unlikely and possibly undesirable at this moment in time, we should be on the slow path towards a capitalist structure that we're used to. Change has been the focal point of the questions that thinking about the financial crisis has raised for me. Some things will definitely change, and I will now just briefly talk about what I think a couple of those might be. First of all, a financial crisis means less money will be spent, and having heard today that a council in a small town in Wales has taken the action of turning streetlights off to save money and energy, I wondered what effects this sort of action could have upon our 24-hour lit culture if it affected the nation. For example, walking from A to B at night whilst very drunk would become much more of a struggle than it already is.
Actually, that'd be like taking glasses from a partially sighted person. It's just not very fair, really. Maybe they should think of something else.
Though could it perhaps have a positive effect upon arguably bad things that some people do at night, such as binge drinking and staying out very late and thus not sleeping enough, because travelling would be much more difficult in what might be total darkness? Or would it have negative effects such as higher crime rates, it being far easier to steal, mug or whatever? It's an interesting idea, which I personally think is a very bad one, but serves as food for thought relating to the effects of an economy crisis leading to spending less money. Finally, one thing certain to change, or at least I hope, is that daytime TV and soap operas will not be broken up by certain companies' advertisements that basically advise people to get themselves into debt they cannot get themselves out of, because they will pay the debt for them, and somehow magically make this new massive debt more manageable.
Getting into debt is easy. Credit cards, overdrafts, loans, catalogues, more credit cards. Getting free is the hard part. But if you feel
Stop buying things from catalogues with credit cards. Might help.
Debt Free Direct could have the key to set you free. Call us for free impartial advice. It may seem too good to be true, but there is a little known piece of government legislation which, providing you qualify, could reduce your monthly payments by hundreds of pounds. Write off what you can't afford to repay, stop all hassle from your creditors, and
Yeah, 'cause we'll hassle you now.
months, and it won't cost you a penny. So if you owe £15,000 excluding any mortgage, Debt Free Direct could have the key to set you free.
Ah, piss off.
Surely telling people that if they can't afford to pay off large debts, and if they are finding them unmanageable, that they can write them off, is asking for financial crisis. I'm not great with maths, and I do not really understand how our economic system works, but I do know that if a lot of people within a society spend money that they simply do not have, and then don't pay it back, then there will almost certainly be financial problems that even the ingenious method of consolidating it all into one big fuck-off debt won't solve.